It's time to implement a universal basic income, to address poverty, to acknowledge the essential unpaid work like care that we all depend on, to give people the time they need to find meaningful work, through retraining, going into education, or starting a business. This crisis has shown how precarious our work is, and how close we are to losing the income we count on to survive. We need bold measures that invest in people. A basic income would create a secure income floor that everyone walks on and no one falls beneath. Scotland has a world-leading plan to pilot basic income. For this plan to be most impactful, we need to commit to implementing a basic income now.
And Cleo joins us to debate her arguments with the political commentator Ian Macwhirter. Cleo, just first of all, how can this be a fair system when the rich get exactly the same amounts as the poorest?
The first stage of implementing a basic income is to reform the income tax system. So you essentially don't want people on very high incomes to be financially better off at all, and for them to pay a larger sum. So we still get the benefits, but we're not paying out significantly to people earning a lot of money.
And Ian, as Cleo says, this would create a secure income floor that no one falls beneath, given the current circumstances. Doesn't that sound like a good idea?
Well, the problem is that we already have a floor below which people are not supposed to sink, and it's about the same level as what most people are proposing as universal basic income. The Reform Scotland plan, which is endorsed by the Scottish Government, is about £5,200 a year, which is about the same, £100 a week, as universal credit. The various schemes that have been introduced, including in Finland, that's €550 a month, and most of the other schemes are around the same level. And that seems to me to be essentially universal basic poverty. Because if that is supposed to replace the benefits system as it exists, with all its different additional top-up benefits, then you would be grinding people down into a form of institutionalised poverty. Now, I assume that's not what its advocates are intending. They envisage it perhaps increasing above £5,000 a year in future. But even at £5,000 a year, you'd be talking about it costing £20 billion a year to the Scottish budget. That's only 2/3 of the existing Scottish budget. So anything that would be recognisable as a genuine income, I mean an income that people can actually live on, not this very minimal stipend, something like £20,000 a year perhaps, would be prodigiously expensive. And it would be almost impossible to generate, well, the public support for a policy which would be taxing people massively, taxing people on modest incomes, taxing them massively in order to give money to millionaires who basically don't need it.
Okay, let's put some of those points to Cleo then. It would create institutionalised poverty, Cleo.
Not if you did it right. I don't think anyone's proposing implementing a basic income that would do any of those things. Most people, any decent basic income schemes aren't proposed to replace the benefits system entirely. Anyone that has a different cost of living, for example, people with a disability or people who spend a lot of their time caring for someone, they have additional costs and therefore their basic income need is higher. So you would have to have some additions on top. Basic income isn't to replace the benefit system. And to fund it, income tax is one part of it, and reforming that would be necessary. But really what you need to generate is a wealth fund with additional money that addresses the additional cost of implementing something as big as a basic income. So things like data tax or land value tax, wealth tax, that creates money that you then distribute as a basic income.
What level would that income be at though, Cleo?
Well, this is what you have to plan. We have to decide what we want to do with a basic income. I think the first step is to change our existing social security to make sure that it is sufficient for people to live off of, starting with implementing some of the principles of a basic income in benefits that we already have, then thinking about universality at a low level, as Ian's mentioned, and then thinking about how we increase a basic income to this aspirational rate of something that people can live off of, which I completely agree with Ian. It should be the aspiration for a basic income.
And Ian, what about that point and the fact it would simplify the benefit system, which is pretty complex at the moment, and it would remove the stigma from benefits?
Well, as we've heard, it wouldn't replace the benefit system. It would just make the benefit system even more complex. But what's worse, it would involve a perverse form of redistribution. Because as I say, you would be, even at the very minimum, basic level, £100 a week, which frankly no one can live off, you'd be talking about an extra 20 billion in taxation in Scotland. Now that, you know, we'd love it all to come from the wealthy, but it wouldn't. A lot of it would come from people in relatively modest incomes, and they will never accept that they should be taxed in order that millionaires should be given a basic income, which, as I say, they don't need. I mean, I understand what people are trying to get at here, but I think that this is a perverse and a circuitous way of achieving it. I mean, what I think would be much more sensible would be to look at something like the Danish system of flexicurity. Now, there they don't have a universal basic income. What they have is a kind of income guarantee. So if you lose your job, you get 80% or 90% of your previous earnings for 2 years until you find another job. This creates a great deal of flexibility in the labour market, but it also gives people the kind of security they need in order to be changing jobs, which is what we're going to be seeing a lot of in future with new technology. People are going to have to change jobs many times in their career. And the problem with the existing system of minimal universal credit or universal basic income is that it would plunge people into poverty. And there is simply no way that you could sustain anything like a livable income on the kind of taxation that will be required. I mean, you can see that with the furlough scheme. Now, the furlough scheme, which exists at the moment, which is supporting many millions of employees, is something approaching a universal basic income because it does guarantee people's living standards. But it's completely unaffordable. As we've seen, it would be impossible to sustain this for much more than another few months.
Let's put that to Cleo.
A massive fiscal crisis of the state, which would mean cuts in public spending. Nobody wants cuts in public spending.
Cleo, just pick up on that point.
I mean, the point again is just that you don't fund this all through taxing people's incomes. You need to come up with a new way of funding it, and those new ways of funding it can be innovative and drive other things, for example, carbon tax. I think it's being purposeful. If we want to do things like eradicate poverty or to shift the way that we address income, we need to think innovatively about how we fund that. And it's not just using the exact same systems and levers that we already have in place, as is suggested. Yeah, think tank models for basic income use the existing system so it's recognizable, but that doesn't mean that that's the only way that we can pay for basic income. So
we'll have to leave it there. We'll have to leave it there. I know this debate will go on and on and on, but we'll have to leave it there. Cleo Goodman and Ian Macwhirter, thank you both for joining us in Scotland tonight.